All right, we begin part two of our look at Islam. And so last time we were talking about kind of the history of Islam, the spread of Islam, the role of Muhammad, and kind of his role, his identity as a prophet, calling the people of the Arabian Peninsula back to the true Abrahamic religion. And in this presentation, we're going to look at more kind of the nuts and bolts of kind of the practice of Islam and the doctrinal divides within Islam and what Islam looks like, has looked like, and also looks like today. So often when you hear people talk about or break down Islam, they will often mention the so-called five pillars of Islam, and this is something by and large that, as I understand it, that there's kind of broad agreement amongst Sunni and Shia Muslims for most of these. And of course, there is the belief in witness. We were talking last time about there's one of the core aspects of Islam, particularly in its response to the complex polytheism of the day in which it came about, is the simplicity. And as you know, in polytheistic systems, when you please one god, you're angering five others, and it's this kind of this endless juggling act of trying to appease these kind of petulant divine personalities. And Muhammad's message was a kind of a return to, in some ways, the simplicity of monotheism. There's no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. Shiites add to this kind of declaration of belief and witness, and Ali is the friend of God. You remember last time we were talking about how the Shiites split from the Sunnis in that they recognized that Ali, who was a son-in-law of Muhammad, as the proper heir to the mantle that Muhammad leaves behind, whereas Sunnis recognize Abu Bakr, kind of the right hand man of Muhammad, to be the proper heir of Muhammad. But we'll explore that split a little bit later. Daily prayers. Devout Muslims are called to pray 5 times a day. And wherever they are, they unroll their prayer rug and they bow and do their ritual of prayer in the direction of Mecca, the holiest city in Islam, as we talked last time, the site where Muslims believe that the belief in one God was kind of formalized by Abraham himself centuries ago. Zakat. The pillar of zakat, charity or almsgiving. There is certainly a thread within Islam of helping the poor and giving of your own wealth. You'll see this stat change. There's nothing, as I understand, really kind of official about this, but this is one that pops up a lot. At least 2.5% of your accumulated wealth should be given towards charity or helping the poor. Fasting as kind of a core way of bringing yourself back in tune with your own spirit and with God. Frequent fasting is recommended throughout the year. In the holy month of Ramadan, which is if you remember, this is the month in which Muhammad is said to have had his visionary experience with produced the Quran. Ramadan is the holiest month in Islam, and devout Muslims are obligated to fast from sunup to sundown during Ramadan. Now, Ramadan by the Western calendar shifts around. It's the Islamic calendar is a 354-day lunar calendar, which is 11 days shorter than the Western Gregorian calendar, and so it shifts around by the Western calendar. It doesn't kind of correlate to one set season or month in our calendar. And then the Hajj, which is the one I've kind of picked to kind of talk about in some more detail. Muslims are called upon, they are obligated to, at least once in their life, if they are physically able, if they are financially able to do so, to go to Mecca during the time of the Hajj, the pilgrimage, and undergo this very, very specific ritual. And by doing so, I've heard different things. Muslims believe this is kind of a cleanser of sin. It also allows you to add Hajj, Haji, as part of your name. It's certainly an act of tremendous honor to have gone through this, but also has believed to have great spiritual benefits as well. So, what does the Hajj look like? Pilgrims go to the Great Mosque. They start at the Great Mosque, and they go into that central courtyard where the Kaaba is, and they walk around it 7 times, doing their prayers. I showed you a picture of what that looks like in the last presentation. And then it's kind of structured around this really kind of complex journey, and they travel and they stop at various places that have resonance with the life of Muhammad and traditions in the history of Islam. They travel, stop at rest of the town of Mina outside of Mecca. They move on to the Arafat Valley, where tradition says Muhammad gave his last sermon before he died, and they keep vigil and pray from noon till evening. And then they go out into the desert and they gather up 49 stones. I've also seen different numbers for this part, and then they approach three pillars. Where they that represent the devil, and they throw these stones at the devil to confront the devil. And this has to do with a tradition of Abraham in the desert confronting the devil. It certainly kind of resounds with, to my mind, with Jesus being tempted by the devil out in the desert. It seems to kind of draw from the same well. But there are three pillars. Now there are these large, broad walls meant to accommodate the much larger crowds. Hundreds of thousands, millions of people do this, and they were actually having. Before they changed from these fairly narrow pillars to the walls, they were having problems with people throwing these stones, missing the pillars, and hitting their fellow pilgrims. So now they have these massive walls, broad walls, that are very difficult to miss unless you're just a terrible shot. And I'll show you what they look like on an upcoming slide. But now they do this for the safety of the hundreds of thousands of pilgrims that go on the Hajj. And then they return to the Great Mosque and walk around the Kaaba again 7 times. And then they walk back and forth 7 times between the Great Mosque and the nearby hills. So there's lots of walking. And in fact, another problem they were having is when Ramadan would fall in the hot summer months, people were becoming overheated and dying of stroke. And so now in parts of this, they have these large kind of enclosed air-conditioned walkways so people can do these journeys of the pilgrim in relative comfort and safety. But outside in the elements, out in the desert, it can be brutal. And then they drink from the sacred Zamzam spring, where in Islamic belief the angel Gabriel touched the ground and water sprang forth. So I'm not going to dwell on this slide. You want to pause and look at it on your own. There's a lot more to the Hajj than I tried to outline kind of the core basic parts of the journey. But this shows you kind of the complexity of kind of stage by stage. Here's the Great Mosque. There's the Kaaba in the courtyard, and then the various kind of parts of the journey. Here's the 3 pillars or walls where you stone the devil, and you go out to various sites. Men get a haircut as well, again as a ritual sign of obedience and the like, and then ultimately the return to the Kaaba near the end of the journey. Yeah, here's the so-called stoning of the devil. So early on, as the Hajj kind of developed as a pilgrimage, there were these narrow wooden pillars, but now you can see the hundreds and thousands of people there, and now they have these large walls here, and they keep the crowds away by this low retaining wall, and that allows you to kind of throw your stones ritually at the devil without harming your fellow pilgrims. Here's kind of a typical plan of a mosque that you would find. You would find these elements in pretty much every mosque that you would travel, you would encounter around the world, with of course their own individual style as well. But by design, a mosque is meant to reflect the simplicity of Islam. Mosques tend to be fairly unadorned. Islam, by and large, of course, is an iconic religion. Is that you do not depict God in human form. You do not depict the Prophet Muhammad in human form. And so again, there's that simplicity of things. And so art in mosques tends to, if there is art, it tends to be geometric. It tends to be, you use the calligraphy, the Arabic script of the Quran itself becomes the artwork, but you will not see pictures, you won't see statues, you won't see stained glass that you might find in a Catholic church. So mosques tend to be kind of made up of kind of 2 large rooms. The first room is a room of kind of preparation. You purify yourself at the fountain. You kind of ritually cleanse yourself to prepare yourself for the more intense spiritual practice inside the central room of the mosque. There's often a platform for some kind of more informal teaching or addressing crowds here in this room. And then in the main chamber, where you'd find the men with their prayer rugs, kneeling and bowing, you'll have this raised minbar, where the the local imam or teacher will give the message, lead the congregation in prayer, and everybody faces the Qibla, as it's called, or the mihrab. And this is this hollowed out apse area, which is built to in the direction of Mecca. Of course, the minaret is a very famous architectural element of any mosque. Originally built as a type of kind of ventilation chamber for the building itself. Later became a platform for the cantors to sing the call to prayer, and now this can be done electronically, and from the minaret is broadcast the call to prayer. Is in Islamic countries 5 times a day, calling the people to remind them of that pillar of Islam. Now, kind of the major divides in Islam is between Sunni and Shia. And as we noted last time, Sunni Islams make up about 80% of all Muslims around the world. They recognize Abu Bakr as the first caliph, kind of political and spiritual leader that inherited the mantle from Muhammad, and then the next 3 caliphs after Abu Bakr as kind of overseeing what is often called the Golden Age of Islam. And this is the age of Islam where it has this rapid geographic and political spread, but it's also this age, kind of golden age of intellectual and scientific and literary advancements, all under the banner of these caliphs, these Islamic leaders. They emphasize the ultimate authority of the Quran over later traditions and revelations, usually called hadith. So the Quran is kind of the holy text of Islam, and then hadiths are these later kind of traditions and revelations, some attributed to Muhammad and other teachers as well. They carry less weight for Sunnis. Deeply aniconic. Again, you do not depict God or Muhammad or the prophets or really any figure from the sacred scriptures in any kind of human form. To do so would be to reduce their power, their holiness, their sacredness. And it's also Sunnis make up a wide variety of Muslims. It's under that banner of Sunni Islam that you find the most kind of radicalized forms of Islam. So the ones you hear about in the news, Al Qaeda and ISIS and the like, are, if you strip it down to the core, they are Sunni Muslim. But you also find Sunni Muslims on the far other end of that spectrum, the more secularized Muslims, you might say. So the vast majority of Muslims in this country, in America, are Sunni, and they also tend to be really more so than anywhere else in the world, the most integrated into kind of a secular Western democracy than any kind of form of Muslim belief around the world. Now, Shia Muslim makes up roughly kind of the remaining 20%. They recognize Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, as the first caliph and the first of what they call 12 imams. Usually when you see that term imam, it's usually referring to some form of Shia Muslim. So they have a different kind of trajectory and notion of history of where Islam goes from after Muhammad. And so sometimes you'll see this term 12er. So Shiites recognize there were 12 legitimate imams that followed Muhammad, beginning with Ali. And there's an apocalyptic aspect to Shiite Islam that you tend not to see as, certainly not as foregrounded in Sunni Islam, that surrounds this 12th imam, Muhammad ibn Hassan. Goes back to the 9th century CE, so the 800s. And Shiites believe that this was an imam, the last of these, went into hiding and will one day emerge at the end times, on the day of resurrection, and he will emerge as this figure that is called the Mahdi. There are some traditions that say that he will show up even with Jesus at his side to usher in the end times. And this is a tradition that is largely, kind of noticeably absent from Sunni belief. So as I showed you in that map last time, Shiites are largely centered in Iran today. The vast majority of Shiite Muslims around the world are in Iran and also parts of Iraq. And in fact, that Sunni Shia divide is at the root of a lot of the kind of the political and military conflict in Iran and Iraq today, and also during the time of kind of America's involvement in that conflict over the last 20 to 30 years. Now, in America, there are about 3.5 million Muslims in America. So it's in relation to the larger population, very small slice. But in fact, a large percentage of American Muslims are in Michigan. In fact, the most densely populated area of Muslims in the United States is here in the southeast part of our state, and in Dearborn and the Detroit area. And you can even see our county here, Kent County, is also has. Again, it's in terms of the larger population, it's not very large, but it is one of the larger concentrations of Muslims across the country. You can see from the vast majority of America, there are very few pockets, but you tend to find them on the coasts here in California and in the Northeast, in New Jersey and New York as well. In terms of the ethnicity of Muslims in the United States, the biggest chunk, which actually surprised me, I wouldn't have guessed this, but South Central Asian. There's Indonesia and lands in Thailand and Cambodia, while largely Buddhist and Hindu. Also, a large Islamic presence in Indonesia and the islands of the that part of the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. 33% of American Muslims are South Central Asian. The other 30% African American. Islam has taken a very deep hold in that segment of the population, and 25%, where you might guess, you might think, given just kind of the history of Islam, would be Arab, actually comes in third, and you can see some of the other slices here as well. All right, that's all I got for kind of a breakdown, kind of part two. Certainly the textbook takes you much deeper into these issues as well, but I hope that this was digestible and understandable, and I will talk at you soon.